Hi, I'm the Board Game Bandit, and today we're going to be talking about Smash Up. I have two special guests with me, Sarah Trager and Eric Glassey. Thank you both for being here.
Of course.
Thank you very much.
Smash Up is a very interesting game. It's currently my second favorite game, and I'll talk a lot about it over the course of this recording, and we're going to be doing many segments on Smash Up. But for me, it's an extremely unique game. How would you define Smash Up?
Ooh, so the tagline for the game is it's a shuffle building game of awesomeness. And I think that doesn't really make a lot of sense if you've never played the game or don't have any experience with the game, but I actually think it's a spot on tag for the game.
I have no way of proving this, but I think the term shuffle building was defined specifically to describe what Smash Up is. I just looked it up on Board Game Geek about 5 minutes ago. There are only 6 games listed as shuffle building games, with Smash Up being the first.
Interesting.
Now, maybe that's the first one that was created, but it's the best way to describe the game.
I would describe the game as copyright infringement, destroying and taking over bases.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of that. Smash Up is an incredibly thematic game. As of the time of this recording, there are over 50 different factions, some of which, as Eric mentioned, infringe on other people's copyrights. They made an entire expansion about that, and that's one of the things that I like best about the game, the thematic ties.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing. I'm like, that's awesome. I love that aspect of it. Because you can be looking at a faction and be like, oh, this is clearly, Star Wars, or this is clearly Star Trek, or what's that new one? All Stars. I got, and it was I named it off right away. Space Jam. I looked at it and like, this looks like Space Jam, and you were like, absolutely, this is exactly what it is.
The only reason I bought the obligatory Cthulhu expansion was because in the Miskatonic University faction, there's characters that are very, very, very much so supposed to be the Scooby-Doo in the gang, and I absolutely love Scooby-Doo in the gang, so I had to have that.
Yeah, the obligatory Cthulhu faction itself is a reference to the fact that everything needs a Cthulhu expansion. On a technical note, Smash Up is a 2 to 4 player game. It takes anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, although it generally feels on the smaller side of things. Sometimes the factions can drag. It's been very successful for AEG. I would go so far as to say that it is their flagship product. It's one that they market very well. They are constantly interacting with fans every Wednesday. They give an sort of a preview of what's coming in the world of Smash Up, and that's always very exciting. It keeps me engaged at all times. And despite all of that, I believe that the game is extremely underrated, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. Looking up today's statistics, Smash Up is rated number 582 on Board Game Geek. Now, I'm saying that this is my second favorite game of all time. It has an average rating of 6.87 with 17,000 reviews. Now, that number may seem high, but it's incredibly low. When comparing it to some of the other big-name games, Small World has 45,800 reviews. Carcassonne has 71,000. Catan has 71,000. Ticket to Ride has 51,000. Splendor has 33,000. So it seems like it still has a lot of market to penetrate, and we'll be discussing what we think we can do in order to improve that. Before we get too far, let's talk about some of our favorite and least favorite factions to play and play against. What would be your favorite factions?
So my favorite faction has been the zombies with robots. Just the ability to draw and play, regardless of if it's in your discard pile or not, is just phenomenal.
What about just a single faction, independent of the partner?
Independent of the partner would be zombies. They can just work well with anybody and anyone.
I love the pirate faction. I know it's one of the original ones, and there's been so many good ones to come out since then, but I think it's genuinely one of my most fun factions to play.
Not just for thematic reasons, but it would have to be the superheroes. What about least favorite faction to play against?
That would be a toss-up. It's torn between kittens and ninjas. Either way, I hate what they do. Their mechanic of controlling and destroying is just annoying, especially when they have all those specials that can do it. Right when the base is going to break, you could think you'd have the base and then, boom, it's not yours anymore, and you have 0 points, and yeah, it's just frustrating to play with.
Again, it's from the original set, but the tricksters drive me insane. My husband likes to play the tricksters a lot, and they just bother me. I hate the way that he can just influence my cards by playing his cards. That I hate that.
I love the tricksters. They're not my favorite, but they're a good counter to the ninja kittens. And so you're like, oh, you want to mess with my guys? Sure, mess with this guy. He'll make your day wonderful.
The geeks are the most annoying to play against because they can basically counter your most powerful cards and simply not let you play them. They can take control of your minions as you play them. They have a card that lets you look at your hand and play a card from your hand. Every time that, smash up on the computer or someone picks the geeks, it's like, oh. But pirates, I enjoy the pirates as well. They have the ability to just basically blow up everyone on a base, and that is also incredibly annoying. For the first part about Smash Up that I want to talk about is actually something that Sarah had been alluding to with the base game, and that's how well the base game has held up over time. It's pretty amazing, actually, how it doesn't feel like any of those factions are particularly underpowered, and how they still have relevancy despite the fact that the game has been modified and there are close to a dozen different expansions over time.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the factions that came out in the first release of the game are some of the ones that I go to almost every time. And I have everything that's ever come out for Smash Up except the Munchkin set. So to consistently go back to the oldest cards in my game over and over and over again when I have so many new choices that I could be picking, I think it just shows for me how valuable those cards are, even though all this new stuff has come out, and the new stuff's great. There's some of it that I like a lot, but just to repeatedly go back to those original cards to me shows that how valuable they are to me as a player.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus the seamless ability of the expansions being able to integrate with the base game, and the base games don't lose their potency, their ability to affect real change in the game, in the gameplay, I should say, is really effective and a strong point for the game.
If you haven't already, I would encourage you to go to theboardgamebanner.com, the Smash Up section, and to read the article, How Smash Up Killed Magic for Me, where I had a chance to really talk about why I think Smash Up is Magic simplified, streamlined, and without taking all of your money. Because, I came into Magic roughly around the 5th edition, and they've had to deprecate cards, and they've had cards that were too powerful. Smash Up does not have that problem. It came out in 2012, but they've been releasing content very rapidly, and there really is nothing that is overpowered. There are some things that could be tweaked a little bit, and things where I think, like Madness, and we'll talk about that at some other segment, but for the most part, the game has really held up well. Everything is still relevant, and you do not need to basically throw everything you've learned out the window every time something new. And I think that really speaks to the game's creative design.
Absolutely. Jim, do you know what has ruined Magic for me?
No, but I'd love to hear it.
Magic. Like you're saying, some cards are just so overpowered it breaks the game. And I was playing with my brother one time, and he was like, "Oh, and it's the end of the cycle, and I win." And I'm just like, "What? How? Why? All right, next game."
If you think about too how many individual cards that Smash Up has, it's not a fraction of the amount that Magic has, but it's a lot of individual cards, and to not have very many or any at all that directly conflict with another card or a base or something like that, it is pretty phenomenal.
Following on what Sarah just said, another big point about Smash Up for me is how there are very few cases where a card is objectively better than another card. That's not to say that a 5 is better than a 2, because of course a 5 is going to be better than a 2. Smash Up factions have a base design that most of them follow, and that's that you've got a minion that appears 4 times with power 2, although maybe some, like the Bear Cavalry or the Ants, that will either be a 3 or a 1, but it appears 4 times. another minion appears 3 times, another minion appears twice, and then another minion appears only once, and that's the king minion. Most factions follow that format. But the amazing thing is that there are very few examples where cards in the same class, one is objectively better than the other in every circumstance. And the reason for that is because Smash Up is so full of different situations that you may be thinking, that would never be good. You're wrong. There is always a situation where something is going to be the right card at the right time. If you're looking for an example of a card that's objectively better than another, I would say the Tiger Assassin, which is a 4-power ninja that lets you optionally destroy a minion of power 3 or less, is better than the Laser Tops in the Dinosaur 4, which obligatory makes you destroy a minion of power 2 or less. Not only can the Tiger Assassin destroy more minions, but it makes it optional. And there are times when you do not want to destroy anything. The Laser Tops can inadvertently destroy your own minion. So I think the flexibility and the extra power makes that card objectively better, but I have to really struggle to think of many other examples where that's the case, and I think that's a testament to the game's design.
Yeah, I would concur with that.
As far as analysis is concerned, Smash Up is the type of game where you could talk about so much of it, similar to Magic. If I were just making a list of topics I might want to talk about in future segments, I could talk about individual factions. I could talk about the effect of different bases. I could talk about different overpowered combinations, like zombie robots. I could talk about counters to overpowered combinations. I could talk about underpowered factions and what you can do to make them overpowered. We could talk about Madness. We could talk about Titans. We could talk about the Munchkin expansion. There is so much that is analyzed in this game that it makes me be really surprised at why people don't feel it is a deeply strategic game. I've got that sentiment from a number of people. And Sarah, you have a lot of experience teaching the game to new players, so I'd be very curious about your thoughts on that.
I do. I actually am a professional demonstrator, and I do that for a couple of stores in North Carolina. I've done it at numerous cons. And Smash Up is one of the games that I enjoy showing to new players because it hardly ever leaves people unsatisfied. People sit down and they'll play a game of Smash Up, and even if it's not the most rip-roaring good time they've ever had, they genuinely tend to enjoy this game. And they like all of the flexibility, and they love the artwork. And there's so much about this game that is an attractive, setup for new players. I think one of the things that is prohibitive to this game genuinely infiltrating the deep play groups is that it seems like it's this light, carefree game. You can play it relatively quickly. You don't have to know anything before you sit down to play. If you've never played this game before, you can sit down, learn how to play, and play within an hour or an hour and a half tops. So I think there are a lot of people out there who don't believe that this is a strategic game. It couldn't be. It doesn't take that long, and it's got this fun, colorful artwork. So how could it possibly be strategic? And that's so unfortunate because with the number of combinations I read in preparation for this, I read an article. It said that there were almost 1,500 different combinations that you could do with the different factions. That alone to me means that it is a hugely strategic game. If I can come up with 1,500 different combinations of cards to play, just playing those 1,500 different combinations would be strategery that you don't see in some of the higher level games, Euro style games that these players seem to be attracted to. So I don't know exactly what the block is there, but I think that it's unusual because Smash Up is a game that has the potential to be just as strategic as some of these other games. Like I said, maybe it's the colorful artwork or the fun-looking characters or the fact that it doesn't take that long to learn how to play and then actually play through a game. But it is unfortunate that people don't see this as more of a strategic game.
I would second that it has a lot of strategy because if you take an experienced player and put him in a match with 3 other inexperienced players, he's going to dominate. He can control and manipulate and move people around and control the entire game so that he wins. If it didn't have a component of strategy, you would have those 3 inexperienced players would have the same chance of winning as the experienced player. Jim, would you disagree with that?
I feel like that was a backhanded insult at me, which is empirically true. And I'll talk about just how I use experience to my benefit. But I would say that I completely agree with both of you. If you don't think Smash Up is a strategic game, I invite you to play me, and I'm pretty sure that I will wipe the floor with you because I know every card that is in that, and I will use that to my advantage. And I will assume that you don't know what I have, and I will lie about what I have just to have a little bit of gamesmanship there, which is totally par for the course. Everybody does it. There's a big difference in knowing that I can throw a minion like a shinobi at the last second. If you don't know that, you're in for a surprise, and I'm totally going to use that against you. I will not put anyone on a base at all. I will take second place, particularly in a 2-player game, and you'll think, oh, I'm going to get all these points, and he's not going to get anything. Well, you're wrong. So there is a ton of strategy that could also backfire severely, too. If you think that there is not a lot of strategy there, you're playing the game incorrectly.
I think you brought up an interesting point, too, about taking second place on a base. There are some bases where you don't want to take first place, and that involves this whole new level of strategy, is actually having enough power on a base to know if you want to break it or if you want to push somebody else to break it, or if that whole break point versus number of points for which, for second and third place, that is a whole nother layer of strategy that I don't think that people who don't have a lot of experience with the game, I don't think that they see that at all.
Right. The Nobles and the Ninjas both have those second place, higher point base scores, and the Nobles, at least, it's really, you guys really think about what you're doing in order to have an effective strategy and win on those bases. By win, I mean take second.
Yeah, Eric is referring to the Winter Squashed base. It has a 16 power breakpoint. The spread is 2, 4, and 1. The base's ability is that when you play a minion, you can give control of it to another player. And that base stresses me out to no end because you have to think like, oh, I'm just going to give it to this person. And then if you're not careful, you'll end up with nothing on the base yourself. And I've seen it happen, and it's one of the reasons why I put that base on my list of bases that should always be included, because it just throws a giant curveball into the game. Knowing that, like, sometimes usually the spread is that second place will be 2 points less than first place. Sometimes it's only 1 point. Sometimes it's okay for second place. You don't want to use up all of your good cards to try and get 1 extra point. Sometimes the runner-up ability can create a combo, like the pirate bases, that you move minions to other bases. That can set up taking first place on a more valuable base, potentially by yourself. These are the things that you need to be aware of. You have to look at everything. You have to know what bases are coming, what other players can do. In one of Sarah's recent demo events, we actually played where we had no idea what bases were in the set. And that was a huge disadvantage for me because I couldn't say what was coming. I was operating blind. I had to be very careful not to use all my minions on a base when the base I'd really like to break would come out next.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I feel like the bases and their abilities and their point spreads for second and third place, I think that they add this whole nother level of strategy. That you have the factions, and they include, this strategic, okay, which factions meld together well, which ones combat other factions well, and all of the individual powers and abilities of each faction. But the bases are almost like this hidden layer that is almost just as important as which factions you choose and how you use them, because these bases have some really good abilities you don't want other people to be able to use. They have some good points that, again, you don't want to give away to other people sometimes, but sometimes you have to in order to get something better or set up for something better. I think the bases are almost like an unsung hero in the game.
That brings me to a point I want to bring up. So some bases have great synergy together. Like you kill a person on this base and you can bring them back to the House of Nine Lives base for the cats at this place, so you can kill them here, bring them there, draw a card from the first base. But sometimes it feels like there's only one really good base out there, and everybody just like dog piles on that one. And that's how I feel like it is about, a little more than half the time. It's just everybody dog piles on one base. What are your thoughts about that?
I have a great story about that. This is at the aforementioned demo night that Sarah did, which was, how many people? 16 different?
I think there were 13 participants in the multiplayer event, which is like a tournament style type thing.
In the second game of that tournament, someone had teddy bear Greeks against robot bear cavalry, against alien princesses, against my superhero rock stars. Now, I knew that the teddy bears were in play. I actually recommended a faction to go along with the player who was using them, and that was the Greeks. I didn't know that someone else had chosen bear cavalry, but the bases were randomized no matter what. And it just so happened that, I believe it's Zara's Palace, it's the 532 bear cavalry base that says, minions of power 2 cannot be played here, which is really annoying for me as the rock stars and the superheroes, because I've got a lot of power 2s, but it's also really annoying for the guy who had robots, because that means that the majority of the robots can't be played on that base. Well, what only I knew was that the teddy bears have a card, I forget what it's called, but you play it on a base and it says that no minions of power 2 can be played on any other base, which means when played on Zara's Palace, no minions of power 2 can be played. And I was trying to tell the person playing the bear cavalry, like, who's playing the robots, I can't tell you why, but we need to break that base as soon as possible. Trust me. And he didn't believe me, and I'm like, no, really, trust me. Because I don't think the teddy bear player knew about that card, and certainly didn't know about it in conjunction with the base. And I knew that eventually he would draw that card and realize, so we want to throw everybody on one base. The problem is that the other base that was in play is the Mushroom Kingdom, the trickster base that lets you move everyone off of a base. You can move other people's. So I'm trying to throw everyone I can onto the Zara's Palace base, and they keep getting moved to the Mushroom Kingdom, and everybody is destroying, and the aliens are beaming them back up, and it's a ticking time bomb. It's like something has to give. One of these two bases has to go. Fortunately, that card never got played, so maybe it was on the bottom of the deck. But if it had, that would have been a nightmare, because it would have been terrible for me. It would have been awful for the robot player who suddenly finds out that they cannot play half of their deck.
That would have been like a Bad News Bears thing.
You just had to go there.
I had to.
Now, to your original point, I think that, yes, there are going to be bases that everyone's going to want to pile on, but there are factions that can play completely differently, and sometimes not playing on the base that everybody else is playing can be an advantage. I think of the Pirates, for example. You can play on another base and then move them at the last second.
Yeah.
What that prevents another player from doing is from breaking the base on their turn, because you supplied power that helps them break that. Specifically with 3 or 4 players, I see a mistake made all the time where everyone is trying to answer everybody else's power, and then someone just throws out on the last second and breaks the base. So I think the initial reaction is to play that way, but when you play often enough, particularly with a higher player count, you need to learn strategies that prevent against that.
And then just like explode on your turn and just break the base and have control over it on your turn.
Exactly. That's called the burst. And different factions have different kinds of bursts, not to be confused with the superhero card known as the burst. I'm sure that's an in-joke somewhere at AEG. But you typically evaluate a faction based on how much power can you drop on a single turn and blindside someone.
I think too, if you have to remember that behind all of these cards are people who tend to play based on their own perceptions and ideology. And I know that I tend to shy away from bases where people are piling on, not because I don't want my set of those points, but because I think, okay, well, there's a lot of activity going on over there, maybe I'll just sneak over to this other base where nobody's really paying attention, and maybe I can ramp some stuff up over here on my own while everybody's over here in this little dog pile. So I think too, I think obviously there are strategies which are objective, and if you are a strategic player, you try to follow the objective strategies of the game. But I also think you have to remember that players are human, and we have our own, motivations behind what we do.
And yet, while the players are humans, some of them can be easily manipulated, right, Jim?
Again, he's looking directly at me. And I'm going to admit that that's part of the game. If I know what cards you have and you don't know what I have, me just using whatever subtext I can, if I'm not stressing over the fact that you're all piling on a base, that's to my advantage. There have actually been times where legitimately I have talked people into destroying someone else's minion. At the Gen Con tournament that I ended up winning, there was a moment on Mushroom Kingdom of all bases where there was a ninja player who was going to destroy a minion on a base, and the base is going to break no matter what. And at that point, he played the hidden ninja with the Tiger Assassin, and by virtue of playing the Tiger Assassin, he's going to overtake me for first place. I'm not going to get first place, and I have no counter. I'm playing zombie dinosaurs. I have no special. But I mentioned to him that I can't do anything to get second place, but what you can do is you can kick off his only minion, the third player, and he'll get nothing. And the guy said that he did not want, it was a gremlin, he didn't want to have to discard a card, and I said, would you discard a card right now to cost him 2 points? And he said, well, yeah. I'm like, then do it. So he did. And the other guy had a look like, I get it, but I'm not happy about it. But at the same time, that's really what the game is about. It's minimizing other people's points, because you typically win a base by playing your strongest cards, which means that you will have a harder time breaking bases on subsequent turns unless you're playing a deck that actually has recycling, like zombies or wizards, where you just draw through your deck and it reshuffles. So if you can deny people points, that is a very good thing. If you can talk people into doing things that are in their best interest, but also in your best interest, that's fair game for me.
I agree. And I also think that you can, if you have, the ability to sway people, you can sometimes get it so that the player that is, coming up, at your back, you can convince them, or players in the game, you can convince them to give the points to someone who's not ever going to be a threat to you in the game. So, somebody has a couple points, you can say, oh, well, this person, if we do this, then they'll win the base. And then it gives this person who's never going to be a threat to you a little bit of points, but it keeps them from the player who could possibly, overtake you.
That point that you just brought up is why I love 4-player Smash Up. I know a lot of people say that 4 is too many, but the addition of the 4th player, who is just by virtue not necessarily, sometimes all 4 players will be in the game. I recently played a 4-player game where we went into extra innings and we all finished with more than 15 points. But for the most part, someone is usually lagging behind. So if you can use them as a dumping ground for points, absolutely. You say to someone like, look, neither of us are going to get first place. We're going to let player number 4 get first place. But most importantly, player 1 isn't getting anything. So do you have this communal agreement? Everyone good? As a matter of fact, I believe that there was an exact instance, Eric, where you convinced 2 other people to all score first place and share 5 points as long as I got nothing.
Yes, I did recall that. That was fantastic. It was one of my shining moments where I was like Jim's kryptonite. I was able to completely nullify all of his relationship manipulating that he was doing during that game, and I built like this alliance of 3 against Jim. It was just the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
I still got second place.
Who won, by the way? I think I won, didn't I?
Actually, you did, I think.
I did. That was a good time.
You also won in life that day, so.
I did. It was small victories that count.
So we're obviously very big fans of the game. As I mentioned before, AEG does a great job of promoting it. I think that there is a lot to analyze, but I also think that there are some more things that we can do in order to improve the overall experience. Now, I have some ideas, but I'm curious if either of you have anything that you would like to suggest. to AEG? What could they do better to just bring Smash Up to more of an audience?
Oh, it's such a good question. So, like I said, I work in a couple of game stores in North Carolina, and I work at conventions and that kind of thing. And I have run so many Smash Up events where nobody or maybe one player is familiar with the game. And it's so surprising to me because this game has been out for years, and it has such a solid history to it. You can buy anything Smash Up related, and you're not getting a bad product. And so for me to be able to know that this is a quality franchise to put your money into, whenever I introduce new people to it, I always like to show them everything that's ever come out for the game and say, you can pick and choose. If you're more attracted to this faction than that one, go out and just buy that expansion for the game. And if you I avoided the obligatory Cthulhu expansion for a very long time, just because I didn't want that one in my game, and I think that having the choice to pick and choose what you want without sacrificing the completeness of this game is a huge selling point. And especially because if you have the core set, that's great. But if you want to go out and buy one expansion and just play a couple of factions between two people, you can do that. And that costs, $15-20 tops. And you can get into this game in a very accessible, very easy way that's still fun.
For those curious, most of the expansions have 4 factions that come with it. You choose 2. You can play it as a 2-player game. That's still 6 different combinations for you. But what a lot of people don't realize is how one combination versus another combination makes such a big difference. So even though you're playing, let's say, Rockstar Explorers versus Teddy Bear Grannies, the fact that the other person is experiencing that combination, the two of them together, makes for a very interesting experience. That any faction combination against any other faction combination is a unique game in and of itself.
So building upon what you're saying about how any faction should be working with any other faction, the game itself is very much a sandbox environment. And by that, I mean you can really do anything you want with it. Jim and I actually had this idea of having a Smash Up tournament. And this is something that I've been thinking about, where you basically have all the factions, you have a draft, and then you play, you decide of, say,
Best of 7.
Best of 7 games, who won out of, you keep the same 3 or 4 people so that you're not playing with random people throwing in, because it messes up the whole tournament style. But with that, you can kind of create a campaign, and that's what I've seen a lot of games do, where they have, various campaigns or seasons or whatever, and it extends the life of the game, because each game you play is basically like a fresh new experience, giving it a campaign feel, and so you experience every single faction. Because I think one of the issues is I don't think I've played with every single faction so far. There's just so many. I don't even think I played with the Cthulhu expansion yet. So having the expansion, or having an idea where you can create your own universe of tournament, would be something I think would bring it to other people.
So I'm saying this on record to make sure that it happens. It's going to happen before the end of 2017. The idea is that we're going to pick maybe 36 or some easily divisible number. We're going to take out some of the overpowered ones, take out some of the underpowered ones. We're going to split all the factions amongst ourselves, and then you're going to have to divide those into subgroups. And what Eric was saying is definitely true, that one game carries over to the next. If you lead with your very overpowered faction, you're handicapping yourself for future games, so you have to think very carefully, what do they have, what combinations might they use, who can I counter with that? Definitely we need to do something with that, and we need to document what we did so that other people can share the experience.
Should we do that for Extra Life?
There is no way that we're going to get that done in the next 7 days, but sure, why not?
I actually really like the idea of a campaign style version of this game. I have done a lot of events where it's either just a demo of the game, or just showing kind of people how it plays, sort of thing. I've done straight up playthroughs where I'll sit down with a whole group of players and we'll actually play all the way through a game. I've done tournaments where we play multiple sessions of the game with the same players, and every single time, it's a pleasant experience, but it feels like it is very, very self-contained. Once it's over, that's it. there's no future games going to come out of this. There's, no overall discussions of the event. Sometimes people get really excited and they'll talk about it for 5-10 minutes after the game is over, but that's it. So as soon as you walk away from the table, it's done. And so the campaign actually seems like a really fun idea.
Another suggestion I would make, and I'm actually going to name this one so that, AEG, if you're listening, just give me royalties and you can use this. I would like to suggest Smash Up Back to Basics expansion. One of the hardest parts about Smash Up is the learning curve. As people have mentioned, an experienced player, unless you do something to handicap them, like giving an underpowered faction, and I actually talk about how to onboard new players on the website, I recommend you check that out. Unless you do that, an experienced player is going to win the majority of the time, and sometimes it's not going to be close. If someone didn't end the game prematurely on the last tournament game, I would have won and someone would have had 1 point. And that, can be hard for some people. I would like to see a back to basics expansion, which is all new factions that are solely for the purpose of teaching. They are very straightforward. When people ask me what faction should they take for their first time, I say things like zombie dinosaurs, things that play very straightforward, no specials, no nuances to them. Even zombie robots, the order in which you play the robots is very important, and you may not know what you have in your deck, and that will affect the order of play. There are certain combinations that work very well for teaching the game. The problem is they're a combination of different sets. There isn't really one single set that serves as the go-to teaching smash-up set. And so I'd like to see a set specifically created for that purpose so that if you're a new player, you can say, if you want to learn the smash-up system, smash-up is not a game. Smash-up is a system, and that's one of the things I love about it. So if you want to learn how to play the system, go buy the Back to Basics expansion, and that will make it a lot easier to teach people, and you don't have to invest in the cost.
I like that idea because I think, I'm a professional demonstrator, so it's my job to teach people how to play these games. And when I bring out, I have the big geeky box, I have everything in it except the Munchkin stuff. And when I bring that out, it's a catch-22 because it's so great to be like, look at all this cool stuff you can play with. But for new players, sometimes that can be intimidating. They have no idea where to start. And we've added some fairly complex ideas over time, the most recent one being the Titans. And for their first time out, because this is, like you said, Jim, like it's a system, not just, one game. It's got this whole, backlog of strategy and knowledge that players should really have if they're going to experience it in a manner that lends them the feeling like they know what they're doing, they've experienced something that they understand, that they've enjoyed, that kind of thing. It would be nice to have something to show people where you could say, this is the basics of the system, learn this, and then you can play anything in Smash Up you want. And I think the game is really accessible, so I think some people may not feel like this is necessary, but being someone who's taught this game again and again and again to a lot of new players, it really does. It's an attractive idea to me to have something that would be easy to introduce new players to.
So, Sarah, being someone that demonstrates games and this being a podcast about helping expand the community, what games what factions are currently out there would you suggest? Because if you throw in something like something that has more advanced skill, and even though the beginner person has base factions, and I'm over here with specials that can mess up his day, it's going to frustrate him.
Yeah. I think the core set is a great place to start because it is kind of the basics. That's what we started with, right? And I definitely think that leaving out the Cthulhu expansion, there's some fiddly bits in the Cthulhu expansion with the Madness cards. I think leaving that one out and leaving out the Big in Tokyo or Big in Japan expansion because of the Titan cards, I think those two are the most important to leave aside for brand new players. And like I said, I think the core set is probably the best place we have to start right now. If we were going to quickly grab something, I would say go all the way back to the beginning, start with that.
Just don't use ninjas because ninjas have specials that are played at the last second, and that can catch people by surprise, and they have a lot of them. They also are played very counterintuitively. If you were playing as the ninjas, it's not going to be the same process of just apply as much power. Ninjas are a lot of wait and see, make your own moment. And it took me a long time to really appreciate how well they were designed. I used to think they were really bad. Then I started playing predominantly 2 players, and I now really enjoy the ninjas.
I think one of the interesting things about this game is that everybody has basically the same thing. Everybody has minions. Everybody has actions, right? Your minions are fairly the same. We have that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 breakdown where everybody has roughly the same stuff in their deck, but it's so completely different depending on which faction you have. And players, especially brand new ones, are not going to want to sit there and look at every card in their decks before they start in their opponent's decks to see what's coming, what might happen. So having a basic set of cards that behave similarly would make it, I think, so that players could have an experience that, like I said, is fun, but also helps them to feel like they completely understand what's going on and why things are happening the way they are.
The other thing I wanted to add to the game, which is really more outside the game than anything else, it's a resource. And this is based on what Sarah was saying as far as different personalities. I think that the factions should be categorized and ranked in terms of what they do well. It's really hard to do this in Smash Up to try and come up with a concise list. Just reading my list here, there's factions that supply power, extra plays, power negation, power swinging, like playing at the last second or taking control of other people's, movement, card draw, searching through your deck, recycling your deck. If we could somehow categorize these into 5 or 6 categories and then rank the factions in each of those and make that be public, I think that would be very good. What that would let you do is it would let you play to your personality as a new person. If you, let's just for lack of a better term, this is your screw other players category. If you saw that the tricksters and the geeks scored very well and that's your personality, you would lend yourself in that direction. If you don't like to take that aspect of Smash Up and you're just all about power and being fast and furious, well, you can look and see who does that well, and you could also use that as a guide for figuring out what works well. Power and movement work really well. Power and power negation don't really work as well, but like power and recycling, if you just saw that there were labels for that, you could figure out on your own what would be the good combinations, and I think that would speed up the learning curve as well.
I like that idea a lot because being somebody who has run multiple events, I don't ever want to suggest to someone that they play a certain faction because I want them to discover and explore the game as I've been allowed to do. So I don't want to take that away from my new players, but I also don't want to leave them at a disadvantage where they're playing things that they don't fully understand or don't like once they get into it. You know, a lot of times people will be like, oh, the grannies, that's funny, I'm going to play that deck, not knowing anything at all about what that deck actually does and how it behaves. So a lot of times players end up having not necessarily a subpar experience, but an experience that they wouldn't have necessarily chosen had they made a more informed decision. But allowing people the information to have those informed decisions is difficult without, personally, I feel like I don't want to, suggest something to them or push them in one direction or another. So having something that they could quickly look at, quickly understand, and find their personal views of play in, I think that would be fantastic because then they could make a more informed decision about their choices, and that would create a play state that they more enjoy than if they just randomly chose something based on the artwork or the words.
I actually encountered that, and that was the inspiration for this. Someone chose a particular faction that they were new to the game, and I had to very carefully think about how to say this because I knew that the person was new, and I had to come up with a polite way of saying that that is a really hard faction to play, that as an experienced player, I can still stumble with that, and I was concerned that they would be in for a very rude awakening in their first or second time playing the game. And, there's a very fine line between telling other people what to do and trying to offer friendly advice. Mm-hmm. So I think that could be mitigated by what, Sarah was saying.
So the Minion has a randomizer app where you can select what base game, what expansions you have, and it tells you a plethora of cards to play with. So what if there was like an app that did something like this, quantified all of that data, and with all else being equal, giving all players, equal experience, or you could even modify it like, hey, player A has more experience than player B, you can give them different rankings, and they can randomize the deck or the two factions they get so that, people have a more diverse experience. And so while it's great to have a personality and you definitely want to start off with that, you might want to break that mold and get out of the box, because I keep playing the same cards that I like. I'm like, I know I like zombies. I know I like robots. I know I like tricksters. Yeah, I'm kind of pigeonholed. And I kind of want to experience new things. And so having a randomizer where it'll just give me two randoms. And you can do it manually where you just like roll a dice and get a random card. But
they do have randomizers. They're not very good. Usually it's just what factions do you have, and then it picks two. I actually don't like the idea of random factions, and I hate to keep going back to the same event, but it was just a lot of fun. You said there were 13 people at that event?
13, yeah.
So as the self-proclaimed most experienced player there, I drafted last in a snake draft. So the tension that created was just phenomenal. The idea that I can pick whatever I want, but 12 factions have gone before me, and that really hampers my ability. And I wasn't paying attention to who took what, and that also makes a big deal. But for me to say that, okay, 12 of probably the best factions went, what combination can I pick from the leftovers? And I would have thought that had I gone earlier in the round that, yeah, I could take a tier 1 zombies or mythic Greeks, someone that I know is good with whatever. But what will be left over? Will I be left with something that is absolute garbage and not synergistic at all? I love that tension. So I like the idea of informing people rather than randomization, because, it's possible to be random screwed, and just, if you get vampire ghosts, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to win with vampire ghosts. Although I have won with Ghost Ignobles against some new players. But the long story short is that I think the more information you can create, and I want to plug the Smash Up Wiki, you know that a game has a really good following when there is a completely community-driven wiki about it. I've used it a ton. They have tons of resources, all the description of all the cards, some clarifications, a lot of in-game jokes, and that's what strikes me so odd about this game, that there are 17,000 ratings on Board Game Geek, but there are 10,000 people who like Smash Up on Facebook. So the people who like Smash Up, they love it. They've drunk the Kool-Aid. They're bought into the idea. But there's just we have to do a little bit more to make this be a top tier. There is no reason why this game should not be in the top 100, in my opinion. The rules can be a little bit convoluted at times with specific cards, what takes precedence over. I think they've been doing a great job at refining those ideas over time. The idea that they have modified definitions, that they've come out with official clarifications, that's great. But just to give you a data point, I'm a big fan of the game Colorado. It is number 465 with a higher average rating than 6.97, so a tenth of a point higher than Smash Up, and it has roughly the same amount of votes. There is no way that Colorado is a better game than Smash Up, and I'm saying that that's one of my go-to gateway games. There are maybe 5 or 6 strategies. You pick one of them that is the best, and you adapt on the fly. With Smash Up, you may think you have a strategy until you're playing against someone and they completely derails what you're trying to do. One of my favorite things about the game is when I have my overpowered combinations, and then you start to see other people talk about theirs, and you realize, wow, I never thought about that. That's a really good idea.
I actually thought it was really interesting. You said it had like a 6 point what rating?
Smash Up has a 6.8 rating.
A 6.8. I thought that was really unusual because I have hundreds of board games in my collection, and I am really bad about seeing a board game, looks good, I want it, and I buy it. And I don't always do a lot of research before I do that. And that has led to some games that I just opened up and was like, oh, this was a mistake. Shouldn't have gotten this. So I have started to pay more attention to the ratings on Board Game Geek. And I think, obviously some games are like Smash Up. This is my exact point. With a 6.5 rating or 6.8 rating, I usually won't buy a game unless it has at least a 7.2 rating. And that's just something that I've started to do because I know myself, I know my shopping habits. If it looks pretty, I'm like, oh, I want that. That seems like a good game. And if it doesn't have a good rating, then I'm not going to get it. Unless I know more about it and I know that it's a good game. Now, Smash Up, like I said, I've been playing this game for years. I think this is a really solid game. I think the mechanics behind this game and the support that AEG has lent to this game has made this a truly great game, and I'm really surprised at that rating. That is in my opinion, that's a crazy low rating for this game. This game is good. It should have a better rating than that.
I'm going to actually go out and say that I believe that there is a strong European bias against Board Game Geek ratings. Now, there's a whole mathematical algorithm for how they have the geek rating versus the average rating. I don't pay attention to the geek rating so much. I do go by the average rating, and I also go by mechanics and some other things when I'm evaluating a game. But the closest comparable to Smash Up is Small World, because it has the idea of picking two things and using the combination of them. And Small World has a 7.34. I like Small World a lot. It's also in my top 10, but I don't think that it's better than Smash Up. I mean, I'm saying 100% Smash Up is better than Colorado. That's just a random game that I picked. Splendor, I'm also a very big fan of. Splendor has a 7.5 rating. No, that does not make any sense. Smash Up blows Splendor out of the water in terms of strategy, and I'm saying that as a huge proponent of the game.
I think longevity plays a part too. Splendor is one of my favorite games, seriously, probably in my top 10 favorite games. And like I said, I have a collection that numbers in the hundreds, and it's one of my favorite games. But I think that if you compare side by side Smash Up and Splendor, I think that the value for what you're getting in a game, Smash Up completely blows Splendor out of the water. And I think that there are times when I would prefer to play Splendor over Smash Up, but I think that if you set them down side by side and you said, let's do a side by side comparison here, I don't think that Splendor would stand up against Smash Up as far as it being, Smash Up is just a deeper level of game than Splendor is. You can go so much further into Smash Up than you could ever go into Splendor.
And the game varies with Smash Up. You play Splendor and it feels almost the same thing. It's like I'm piling for rocks. Great. I'm doing rocks things again. I'm a gemologist, whatever. But with Smash Up, you get a new experience. You're like, oh, I'm flying, Nazis or whatever. Not Nazis. Sorry, let me do that over again.
There is not a Nazis faction yet.
I don't recommend
that
that.
would be like
AG.
Nazi zombies, though. If you had Nazi zombies, I'm just saying.
I don't know.
Okay, we need to make that happen.
Look, we can get all the Call of Duty people over into Smash Up. That'll be our gateway for them. Like, hey, come play some. We'll let you be Nazi zombies, and we'll get all the video game players over into board gaming.
What it comes down to is, a game is truly amazing if I could play it for an entire day and not be burned out on it. And Smash Up is one of the rare games that is the case. Most times, I'll play a game once, maybe twice in a row. If the game's short enough, I might do 3 or 4. This is a game that I could spend an entire day playing and just be thinking about, all right, what have I learned from today? Can't wait to do it again. The final thing, since we're running out of time, I want to talk about is just the thematic ties to Smash Up. Because depending on who you talk to, theme is a very important part of gaming. And I think this game is incredibly thematic in a way that does not wear out. The factions really feel like what they are supposed to be. The fact that aliens beam people back up, ninjas are sneaky and destroying everything without you realizing it, robots spreading their programming and just spamming zombies coming back. It's gotten to the point where I think Eric alluded to this earlier, that when a new faction is announced and they say what the faction is going to be, I instantly try and figure out what the mechanic will be based on what the faction is. And I'm right more often than I'm not, but it's so well integrated into the game that my wife, who's only played Smash Up about 5 times, during the recent vote for Oops, We Did It Again, where they're letting the fans vote on the factions, I campaigned hard for Killer Bunnies. I really felt that Killer Bunnies should be a faction. And when I told my wife, who's only played 5 times, she said, so it would be a swarm-based faction where playing a bunny gets you another bunny. And that's 75% of what the faction is. The very fact that a simple name can lend itself to figuring out what the mechanic is going to be, that's unprecedented in my opinion. And again, to use a small world example, sometimes the powers make sense. A lot of times they're just randomly assigned to people. Like the troll ability that gives you defensive, they could have picked any creature ability to give that ability to. Why do the elves regenerate as immortals? That seems more of a zombie thing. Smash Up has knocked it out of the park in terms of finding factions to... And I almost want to ask them, like, how did you do it for It's Your Fault, which is one of the strongest factions, the strongest expansions in my opinion. They let the fans vote on what the 4 winners were going to be, and they somehow found a way to make it work thematically. It's almost like they were hoping that certain factions would win, or did they secretly stack the vote? Either way, I'm so happy with that expansion. They threw in the Tornado faction. It's one of those things where it doesn't matter how well Sharknado works. You can actually be Shark Tornadoes, Sharknado. It doesn't matter how well those factions work together. People want to play them for thematic reasons. People want to be Ninja Kittens.
This was something I didn't actually realize about this game consciously until I did just a little bit of research, knowing that this was going to be recorded, and so I just wanted to make sure that I knew what I was talking about, didn't look like an idiot, and so I did a little bit of research, and this was something that you play a card and you say, oh, that totally makes sense. This ability for this character, that's very thematic. But it was something that I hadn't solidified consciously for myself until I had done the research for this. And I was looking at every faction and generally what it does. And I was just blown away by the amount of thought that I hadn't even realized I had went into every single one of these factions, because each one of them is incredibly thematic and so cleverly put together. And that just, again, it lended a whole nother layer of depth to this game for me to appreciate. It was a really fun little discovery.
I can't say enough about this game. As I mentioned before, there'll be several Smash Up segments. I believe it's the type of game that deserves that. There's so much we can talk about. We wanted to keep this one as a higher level for length purposes, but thank you both so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
And this was Smash Up. I'm the Board Game Bandit. We'll see you next time.